What's up, everybody, and welcome back to the Cyclonic Thrift channel. We've got a fun deck build here for you today. As always, I like to take some time every so often to actually show you what it looks like to build a deck with my method, and taking cards that I already own, right? This deck list is entirely of cards already in my collection. We're not going out and buying cards. It's just an excellent way of building on a budget, right? You take a commander and you just use what you have available to you. You know, maybe it's not the most streamlined, maybe it's not the most synergistic, but it's a way of building a deck basically for free, right, with cards you already have and you'll see can make a deck that can still be competitive, can still be fun to play, have some fun interactions. And so with that, the commander that I picked to kind of build a deck off of today is Omnath, Locus of Rage. So he's a 2 red and 2 green, 5/5 elemental. Has landfall, so whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you create a 5/5 red and green elemental creature token. Excellent landfall ability, and that's definitely what we'll be focusing on for the deck tech. Picked out a ton of cards that either have landfall effects or allow us to get those extra lands onto the battlefield. But his second ability, whenever Omnath, Locus of Rage, or another elemental you control dies, Omnath deals 3 damage to any target. So this is basically removal on a stick. It's also a deterrent of your opponents from destroying your creatures, because you know there are going to be some repercussions, some damage thrown back their way. But we can also kind of control when these elementals die. And there's definitely a lot of elemental synergy in the deck, a lot of elementals that we'll be able to play around with. So moving forward, I want to talk about some ramp, some ways to get some big mana, because Omnath is a big boy, costs a lot, and so we want to make sure that we're able to get him out ahead of curve. And cards like Goblin and Archomancer are going to help us. It's a red and a green for a 2/2 Goblin Shaman. Each spell you cast that's red or green costs 1 less to cast. It's going to help reduce the cost of our commander, but also reduce the cost of basically every other spell that we play. Over the course of the game, this is going to ramp up a ton of value. Another card is Elena Kessig Trapper. It's 4 and a red for a 4/3 Human Scout with First Strike, and you can tap her to add an amount of red mana equal to the greatest power among creatures you control that entered the battlefield this turn. We've got some big boys in this deck. Not to mention Omnath is big as well. Super common for this girl to be able to tap for 5 mana, which in the space of a turn to be able to get that for free basically is insane. It's going to be able to give you enough to get those extra 2 or 3 spells in that turn, and push your strategy along much faster. And then we also have some ways to increase our combat effectiveness, right? We're going to be making a bunch of 5/5s. We've got a bunch of big creatures out here. We're going to be looking to attack, swing out into people, and deal some damage. So Scarred Guildmage is going to be really helpful. Red and a green for a 2/2 Human Shaman. Has a couple abilities. It can give all of our creatures trample till end of turn, and it can turn our lands into elemental creatures until end of turn, which is pretty nice, right? If we have the mana, want to add another attacker. It's also an elemental, so if it happens to die, we can use Omnath's ability. Super nice in this deck. And then Garruk's Uprising. It's 2 and a green for an enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, you draw a card. And then creatures you control have trample. And whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, you draw a card. We're going to be creating 5/5s out the wazoo. So this thing's going to draw us a ton of cards. It's giving everybody trample, so we're going to be able to swing in for a ton of damage. This card is going to be a monster in this deck. But speaking of monsters here, we have a couple cards that really buy into the elemental synergy, right? The creature type that we're looking to build around here. The first being just Masterwood Nexus. It's a 4-mana artifact. Creatures you control are every creature type. The same is true for creature spells you control and creature cards you own that aren't on the battlefield. Can also create a 2/2 shapeshifter if we want. But yeah, to be able to turn all of our creatures into elementals and then have that threat of 3 damage per creature hanging over every single one, it's going to be super nice for politicking, for combat, for dealing damage. This card is going to be a house in this deck. We've also got Nissa's Zendikon. It's 3 and a green for an enchantment aura. You enchant a land, which is unique. It becomes a 4/4 elemental with reach and haste. And then when the land dies, you return that card to its owner's hand, right? So this is kind of nice where you're not going to be losing your land, right? If it dies, you're going to be able to get it back to your hand, which then you can play it to create an elemental with Omnath. So a lot of value there. But it also turns that land into an elemental, right? So if and when it dies, it also can be applied to Omnath's damage trigger. And then we also want to buy into or lean into this dealing a bunch of damage, right? That's really how we're going to win this game, whatever game that we're playing. And cards like Where Ancients Tread are super good for that. It's 4 and a red for an enchantment. Whenever a creature with power 5 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, you can have this enchantment deal 5 damage to target creature or player. So it's just adding extra damage to the field. It can serve as a bit of removal to take out some creatures that are bothering you. But again, because the elementals we're creating off of Omnath are 5/5s, this is gonna go off quite a bit over the course of a game. And then Stalking Vengeance, 5 and 2 red for a 5/5 avatar with haste. Whenever another creature you control dies, it deals damage equal to its power to target player or planeswalker. Can't use this on creatures, kind of a bummer, but to be able to just tack on all this extra damage to our elementals going away is going to be super nice, and will really have a very strong effect on the battlefield over the course of a game. And that brings me to the thrift pick for this deck build. For those of you who haven't seen the channel before, the thrift pick is not necessarily the best card in the deck. Sometimes it is, incidentally, but it's the card that I'm most excited to play. A card that I want to see its effect played out. I think it's going to be super impactful, super powerful, and a card that maybe in most decks isn't all that good, but in this particular deck goes off. And that's so true for this one. So the thrift pick for this deck is Glimmerbairn. It's 1 green for a 1/2 creature, and it has 1 ability. You sacrifice a token, and Glimmerbairn gets +2/+2 until end of turn. So all of our elementals that we're creating with Omnath are tokens, so they apply to this. When our elementals die, Omnath deals damage to players willy-nilly. So this is just an excellent way we're going to be able to control when and where and how our creatures die, and when and where and how we want Omnath to deal damage to people, because we want some semblance of control over that. And to have a creature here, it's 1 mana, it's super non-threatening. It gets a small buff from sacrificing those tokens, but normally not something that you see on the battlefield and go, that is a problem. But for this deck it will be, because if we've got 5 or 6 elementals out there, we attack with this guy, maybe he gets blocked, maybe he doesn't. If he doesn't, we sacrifice those 5 elementals, deal 15 damage with Omnath, and then this guy is 11-12, deals damage there. This can win you some games. In response to a board wipe, can help pick and choose where that damage goes. So it's it's something that is going to be really nice in this deck. So yeah, so those are the main cards I wanted to talk about. Again, these are all cards that I pulled out of my own collection, already had lying around, didn't have to order any of them. Built this deck basically for free. I just find it's a super fun way to kind of keep yourself acquainted with the cards that you already have, to go through the process of deck building with actual physical cards, because as much fun as it is to do deck building online, there's something to be said for actually sitting down, sifting through the cards, flipping through, trying to find that perfect match, that card that you look at and like, oh my goodness, this is going to be great for this deck. And I had a lot of fun building it. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Usually I ask for recommendations, if you want to to let me know what cards I missed, but it's harder with this, if I don't have the card in my collection, I can't add it in, obviously. So, but I hope you guys enjoyed watching the process. And yeah, as always, take care and stay thrifty.